right, welcome everyone to our webcast on maximizing IT efficiency. Today we're going to explore the topic of IT service management, which is an important topic for anyone who has an internal IT staff or evaluating their IT partners or considering bringing some functions of IT that they may outsource in-house and are trying to navigate how to do that successfully. So we're going to share our lessons learned, and to help facilitate this topic, I'm joined by two experts on the topic in the discussion. First of all, returning to the webcast for, I don't know, the umpteenth time, our Chief Technology Officer, Calvin Engen. Calvin, welcome. So,
thank you.
Calvin, I thought maybe just to credentialize a little bit, because people hear CTO and they think maybe you spend your time in data centers and managing databases and things like that. But in fact, you've been on the F12 journey for a long time and helped build the service management plant. From help desk services involving scores of individuals supporting thousands of users and companies across Canada and in some cases around the world, as well as project delivery services and data center and security services, all of the above. And you've done it from a really small scale when we were just, a few dozen people up until, F12 at the present time, when we have a couple of hundred. So thank you very much for joining us. And along the way is Mike Gilbert. Mike's one of our directors who helps with our internal information systems here in IT at F12. But importantly, Mike, you've been along the journey working with Calvin for many, many years, and on the systems and the tools and the automations and what it takes to make IT service effective, efficient, and accountable. So thank you, gentlemen. As I mentioned, we want this topic to be for people who are exploring how to make IT operations more effective, efficient, accountable, serve the organization better. And I want to start this off with a little bit of a thought experiment. So imagine you're not, and I'll start with you, Calvin. Imagine you're not with F12 anymore. You've left F12. Maybe a cousin of yours has said, Calvin, I need your help. We've got this company. We've got 3 or 5 IT guys that are operating and gals that are operating within our company, and they're not very effective, and they seem busy, but we don't know what's going on, and all we've got right now is Outlook. So I had a cell phone, so the organization's been getting by with, hey, I need IT support, either typing an email or phoning or walking into the offices of these poor individuals, and everything is very ad hoc, not proactive. You've now stepped in to help your cousin out. What's the first thing you do?
So the first thing I would do is tell my cousin, what the heck are you doing? Like, one, I don't know how I got back into this, but I don't want to be part of it. So no.
You love your cousin so much.
Yeah, in all seriousness, we need to start with some of the basics. Part of that would be just getting organized. Outlook is not an effective IT management system. It is not going to do any kind of triage. It's not going to help you understand what the measurement of the velocity of that team is going to be. And so we got to start with a good foundation, understanding, how much tickets are coming in, who they're coming from, what are the challenges in the organization. And so we got to get it into a system that can actually start to do some of those tasks. But even before that is the current team meeting the business needs? If they're just going around fighting fires, it sounds like they're going to be very much in a reactionary state. Calls come in, someone walks up to the desk, emails are flowing in, and they're just reacting. And there's probably little to none proactive measures happening in the organization. And so that's where we need to start, is understanding what that would look like, and continue that journey from there.
It's an old adage, hey, that you can't manage what you can't measure. And so one of the things, and we run into this a lot of, like, really great successful companies, IT isn't their core strength, and they have a function filling it, maybe an individual or a few, and it's all very ad hoc, and they have no sense of the volume of the time it takes to resolve an incident, of the response time even to get to that incident. These are pretty elementary things, but when things are happening ad hoc because everyone's just allowed to walk into the office, and Mary, that is the best friends with this IT individual, brings cupcakes, and therefore that incident gets prioritized or request over. We joke, but we do encounter companies that this is exactly how things are operating, and when demand's not high, I suppose it works okay, but when demand's high, then that falls apart.
As long as the cupcakes are good, though. Like, cupcakes aren't good, sorry, Mary, you're out. But
So so it sounds like you would start with like some ticketing system, some process to manage the volume.
to be honest, the first thing I would do is understand, is the team meeting the needs of the business, and understand what are the business needs. That's fundamental, because IT only exists to serve the business and its objectives. So the first thing I want to really understand is, what are the core components of the business? How do they effectively make money? What happens if IT isn't up? And how does that impact the business? Because then that can start to orient the IT organization, or individuals in this case, towards what those outcomes need to be. Because then that can start to delineate what is the priority in the organization in order for the IT team to meet set objectives. From there, it's really about kind of understanding what the policies and procedures need to exist. The who's who in the zoo, as it were, in order to understand the priorities. If say the IT, let's say, if the ERP system is down, does that impact the ability to create orders, to maybe drive invoices out to the clients? Does it have an impact on payroll? And so then you can really understand, we need to point all our guns or objectives towards making sure that ERP system stays up, because it can have a detrimental effect to the business, as an example. But I think it's really important just to understand what those core objectives are.
So I love that. So before a system that tracks, measures, and reports on the raw metrics of service delivery, one needs to define what those objectives are you're trying to achieve, what the prioritization is, what gets demoted, what gets promoted, what gets triaged, and the functions around that. Excellent insight. And I know we're going to dig deeper into this, but we've got Mike Gilbert on the webcast here. And Mike, same thing. And I'll give you a real world scenario. We've talked to clients who have hundreds of endpoints out there, and servers and cloud services and all the rest, and have no system to remotely manage and monitor them at all, have no effective centralized documentation, have, just imagine bare bones. People have been running around to desktops, or heaven forbid using TeamViewer or something like that to try to remote in. From a systems perspective, first thing Calvin did was he hired you and said, okay, my cousin needs help. What would you do? How would you attack this problem to bring in IT service management?
Yeah, so I would probably lean into, honestly, one of the things that Calvin said there is the measurement. But in this case, it'd be measurement through the monitoring, what's the uptime, what's the effectiveness of everything, as well as the measurement or management of the devices itself. So you're going to need some sort of tool that does that for you. Like an RMM is a great tool for that. So you can get the monitoring, what's up, what's down, what you need to react to and prioritize within that ticketing system, and you have it all tie in, so you still are feeding into that same, this is the funnel of where you get your work from. And then on top of that, you're going to want to be able to measure the system health of sort of everything on your network. So you don't know if you have weaknesses or gaps if you're not able to pull information such as, is the patching effective? And then suddenly a vulnerability comes out and you're like, what software have my team installed on all these devices? Am I vulnerable? So you can pull all of that from an RMM tool, and then you feed all of that into the documentation part that you had brought up there too. Is if it's easy to reference, there's not going to be mistakes. You're not going to spend time being like, I need to get a hold of this one person because he's the only guy that knows this system. You get it all nicely written out, and then he's on vacation, he can stay on vacation, and the rest of your team can pivot and take care of it immediately.
Or avoid the worst case scenario, which I mean, maybe it's not the worst case scenario, but one of the worst scenarios we get occasionally is that phone call that said individual that has all the knowledge has left the organization on unfriendly terms. Clean it up, fix it up. Nothing was documented. There's no processes, and let's de-risk the situation as rapidly as possible. So just so everyone's following along on the acronyms, RMM stands for
Remote Management and Monitoring.
Yeah, excellent. So effectively, one of the first steps from a systems perspective to get to proactive stance is having systems that can, I guess, triage and monitor the relative uptimes that Calvin said in the process. You determine, hey, this system's really important because it drives productivity, it's financials, IP, whatever it might be, et cetera. Okay, great. So we're starting to get the bare bones of IT service management. We've got some form of workflow management. We typically refer to that as a ticketing system, some automation and RMM tooling in order to get things going. The world abounds with different options to solve these problems. So one thing that I see a lot of is organizations will grab a ticketing system and kind of make that maybe one of the first steps, like Freshdesk, or there's free ones even, and they start to use that. It's a little better than an Outlook. Calvin, you get a ticketing system, it's almost like CRMs in that I see as many or more failed implementations. Like they have the system, but it's not effectively working for the organization, as opposed to successful implementations. And I'm being harsh on CRMs because they're another like bugaboo of wasted time and resources. So what does it take once you've defined your criteria, Calvin, to get your service plant, your team, to operate effectively in a environment that requires incident management?
Yeah, well, I think the important part here is you want to align to, some sort of framework. What I mean by that is, IT industry has a tremendous amount of frameworks. New ones are popping up all the time, but generally you want to orient yourself around a methodology. So ITIL is an example of that. So it's Information Technology Infrastructure Library, which, it is what it is. But I mean, the point is the point of it is that it's creating a methodology in which you do IT or perform IT. And so this helps to triage, prioritize different aspects. It helps the team understand what's important right now and what needs to be done in different cases. This is super important for an IT manager or director of IT, because then they can ascertain exactly what the capacity of the team is. Because once you're measuring those aspects, now you can start to say, oh, are we adequately resourced for what we have currently coming in? Or, is there a hotspot in the organization that continues to reoccur? And based on that reoccurrence, maybe you need to, build an IT project to resolve that, or build a better foundation. So you're not having to react. You can now start to proactively control the IT within the environment. And so those are all kind of components that help drive an understanding of where you sit. And it's something that I would absolutely do if my cousin called me up and says, okay, we have this thing, it's working, but it's broken. And we need to start going through these objectives. And so once you now have a procedure in a ticketing system, now you can start to build some KPIs around that, make sure that you're triaging appropriately, putting the right people on the right tasks. So, maybe you have, Billy, Sue, and Bob in the team, but they have different expertise. Well, maybe you want to do some ticket-based routing based on their skill set. And so that Bob maybe gets the ERP items, or Susie gets the desktop items, and this helps to effectively utilize the resources in a more proactive measure or management.
And for those joining us in this conversation, we're going to come in a little bit later about how F12 can help organizations achieve those objectives Calvin was just discussing. But Calvin, I want to go back on something, because your cousin, you stepped in, there's an existing team there, and I'm going to lean on my CRM experience. Because at the end of the day, everybody wants the reporting and the dashboards. Where are we at? What's working? What's not? How's everyone doing? What are they doing? When are they doing it? But you get a busy sales team, and I'm sure it's the same with techs. And now you're saying, you're busy. What I need you to do is start using the system, recording things, telling everyone else, no, you can't just, like a ticket or an incident has to be logged in order for all of that measurement to happen. What would you do to affect that discipline within an organization that's largely lacking? And I'm going to imagine will be certainly salespeople resist using a CRM like it's the end of the world. How do you overcome that hurdle internally?
Yes, so certainly, like any change in an organization, you need to sell it, and selling it is about actually making it more about it's their idea than it is about someone pushing an objective down. And I think often what we'll find is that in IT departments, organizations, they do want to make it better. They don't want to keep grinding it out the same way. They want to look for a better way of doing it. And so ultimately it comes down to, working through a workshop of sorts to have them come up with an idea of how do we make this better? How do we ensure that we can do what we do every day and make it more effective, make it more efficient, make it so we're not doing the same thing over and over and over again. Part of that it would be measurement, so we can understand what we're doing over and over again. Often, like in this scenario, you're having to make investments in tools and technology, process, procedure, or maybe even people. Because maybe now you can actually measure the effectiveness of the people and either give them additional training or perhaps find a different position for them. Maybe that's outside the company. So it's important that you're starting to orient towards that. So is IT being effective in that organization? And so it comes back to that, but really it's making the IT team part of the journey as opposed to force feeding them a set of tools or a set of management IT practices that they have to follow now.
And I should mention that a strategy for that we found have been effective is guided workshops and training sessions and development sessions where you're co-creating the IT service management framework with the individuals who be executing it. I think that's pretty common business practice in order to gain buy-in amongst your team. That's excellent. And they will know what's being measured and behave accordingly. Mike, same question to you. You got a team, they're likely busy, and they're likely even struggling. And now you're bringing in systems and toolings and automations. And there's a J curve when you do that, right? And one of the things about RMMs, I know from my experience in the industry, you don't just get to install it and it magically does stuff. It's like you install it and then you configure it and you design it and you tune it and you set your automations. And so how do you get the team involved and allocate the time? What's your lessons on making sure that the tooling and automations you bring in actually are realized and are not just another monthly expense that sits there and produces an expense line item and no benefit?
I think one of the key things in there also is it leans back on the measurement. So like if Calvin brought up like what you're doing again and again and again, and some of those things, it's even different people doing it. So you have you have Bob doing it one day, and then the next week you have Jim doing it, and then Denise is doing it on the third week, and they don't even realize this is now a recurring problem. But it's something they address every Monday morning. There's a system reboot over the weekend, and they're just like, oh, that's weird. But now you can, with the ticketing, you can pull that out, and then you can use your RMM tools and the automation that you build. So you can see, oh, there's a problem here, and then automate it away. If it's something as simple as, oh, the service needs to be restarted, or we need to run a script or run a specific action, now all of a sudden that task is gone. Your team has time for other things, and it's highlighting all of these repetitive and like small tasks that typically a tech isn't interested in. They don't really want to do that. You can sell them on, now you don't have to do this. We just build it once, and that whole thing is gone. Also, you're not going to get a call on the weekend. You're not going to have to wake up early because you know this thing is going to fail. You can build all this right into your tool
We
and
can take
still have the
vacation.
reporting.
You
Yeah.
can
Take
vacation, that's right,
vacation, right?
yeah.
Like
Yeah.
now we can take a vacation because now you can actually have that work continue to move while that individual is away. So yeah.
And I think it's important for those who are, exploring their internal IT resources, if the team is fully vested in reactive IT, right? So the only thing that happens is when somebody complains, an activity happens, or if a new computer needs set up, and there's no proactivity. And this isn't a criticism. This is what happens when the workload exceeds it. Then the proactive items aren't getting done. And now there's an RMM tool which will nudge you. It'll say, here's a ticket for you're running out of disk space, or the backups failed, or the patching got done, but it didn't apply to these two computers, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The memory is running out on this particular process, and we can go on and on about the things an RMM tool does. But it can automate resolution on some of them, but some of them require people. So I think it's important to understand that if your team's maxed out on reactivity, you have to create capacity somehow for proactivity. The system and tooling can do so much, but I don't know what the stats are, but last time I looked, something like 24% of our incidents are proactive incidents. It's a tool telling us to do something, and that's where we feel good, because when we do something with a client, having to necessarily know about it.
Yeah.
So the system itself won't do it all for you, I think is important. Calvin?
And I was going to say the benefit then of having that is that you can now create automations, and those automations could mean it actually gets resolved without a human being involved, and that is really important. It will inform. You'll have a log of that information, but then the IT individuals are not having to interact with that and do a thing, which is very important. So that trigger of a disk alert can actually go through and say, hey, I'm going to clean up these known maybe temp directories, clean it up and get it back to a safe level. And that requires no user interaction or intervention, which is the ultimate goal, right? And we can work on the things that really matter to the business.
That's great. Yeah, and I know, Mike, in the past, you've been involved in some really creative RMM automations that are specific to certain clients, where an application is errant, like it's buggy and it does a thing. I don't know, doesn't start a process right, or fills up a log file, and the software company is going to fix it on their own sweet time. And you've set up like automations to capture that, fix it, when there's these recurring things. And I bring that up not just to make you sound like the smart guy you are, but to say these take time, research, and investments to create the automation. So there's a capacity required when we're looking at ITSM. It's not necessarily plug and play. I wanted to go on to a bit of another lens here, gentlemen. We've been looking at ITSM, and the mode that I framed it was as if you took over a company and we're injecting disciplines and processes that don't exist. Another scenario is someone has an outsourced engagement, let's say with F12, and they've realized as they've grown or their business needs have changed that they need to insource certain aspects of their IT, perhaps frontline help desk support. I'll just use that as an example. How does an ITSM system, how can it enforce cooperative IT between an outsourced IT vendor and and I'm talking about from the tooling, the RMM, all the way through to incident management, ticketing, dashboarding. Is that possible with effective ITSM? Is that a bridge too far? Calvin, may I go for your thoughts first of all?
Yeah. Absolutely. We do a number of co-managed IT engagements where we're augmenting IT teams to help them with maybe specialization, where they want to take on more of an active role in IT management. And so, some examples of that would be cybersecurity and things of that nature. But the benefit to having the ticketing solution as one platform is now the burstability for maybe capacity. can exist. And so what that means is that perhaps there's an event that occurs in the organization and they need more resources, and that that spillover effect can then happen back, say, to F12 as an example, as a partner. The benefit being is that we can maintain the IT objectives by still providing those services. Now, the component around that is that once you've agreed upon different SLAs, different escalation paths, perhaps in the example you used, help desk support is done by the company, but maybe tier 2 or even tier 3 is done by an outside company. And so the benefit to that is that you get the full ticket history of what
Moves
was
with it.
triaged, and then it can continue with that next individual that's in the escalation path, along with all the metrics that go along with that. And so the benefit is that you can start to really work on the business objectives, whatever they may look like, and drive to the capacity that is required, or maybe the client satisfaction or excellence that is necessary for the business to achieve its objectives. So it's a really cohesive way to keep IT management in one kind of system with all the metrics and deliverables that would be expected.
So I see kind of two directions there. Hey, your IT, so an outsourced IT provider has already developed the ITSM practices and likely spent a lot of time on them because they have many clients and it's their business. You can extend that envelope so that you have all that support while bringing in an internal, and we'll talk a little bit about that. There's the other way too, is you could have started adopting an ITSM that your IT provider uses, so that later on you can start extending or outsourcing certain functions. Either way, a lot more smoothly and seamlessly because you have all that centralized ITSM. That's very good, Mike. Same lens to you, but same question to you, but on the lens of the systems, the RMM toolings, secure documentation, etc. How would you look at a co-managed environment that way?
Yeah, so in a lot of ways, there's there's a savings that you have in there on you don't need to install your own set of tools on top of what your provider is already using. So you can use your partner's tools. They already have it configured and tweaked and likely set up in the right way. And that's with the systems themselves, even with the documentation and things along those lines. They've built this documentation. They have it all in there. You can lean on both of those together. And then it allows you to react properly to everything that's in there, as well as you can see what they're looking at. They can see what you're looking at. It makes collaboration a lot simpler. As well as it gets down to even auditing of actions taken, things along those lines. There's the accountability of, on both sides, actions that are taken that can be seen. So if you're looking at something and you're saying, hey, this problem that I was trying to fix just went away. And I think I remember reaching out to my partner about that, and they were working on it too, but they were working with somebody else. But you can now see all of the connectivity in there and see actions taken by other teams.
I think that's really vital. We haven't really dug much into that documentation piece. So, and you just brought that up, which is, IT documentation can exist either in someone's head or on a file somewhere or a bunch of Excel spreadsheets. When we talk about secure documentation, what do we mean? What is that?
So that can be as simple as new user guides. This is how we set things up, and everybody can see that and agree on these are the steps, all the way down to individual how devices are configured, specific information pulled from the RMM or the management tool directly into the documentation. And then it can get even into things like passwords and shared passwords. And then, of course, always the auditing of.
And where does that exist? Where is that? Is it just a fancier Excel document, or?
So for us, it would be a cloud documentation solution. So personally or internally here, we're using IT Glue. But with that, it gives you some resiliency. So a lot of the time, it doesn't matter if you have your documentation in an Excel doc. If your server's down and now you're trying to get it back up and all your passwords and everything are on that server that's down. So rather than hoping you have it all memorized, you can have all of this backed up and in a secure place so that you can continue
And
to
to
work
your
and
earlier
fix the
point, seeing
problem.
who's accessed it, who's changed it,
Hmm.
and all that sort of stuff, which are a lot more challenging to do
Yeah.
elsewise. Okay.
A great reason why you should be doing a disaster recovery plan as it relates to IT. How do you continue to operate IT? Because certainly, if all of a sudden you said, "Hey, let's test whether or not we have the ability to recover a system," and suddenly you would say, "Oh yeah, that server that is down right now, we have all our documentation on it. What are we going to
Mhm.
do?" And so suddenly it really kind of puts in perspective where you need to put that documentation. But the one thing I just want to highlight that Mike said is the importance of automation around documentation.
Mm.
Documentation is a never-ending journey. And so as the system changes from updates and patches and different applications being installed, to have a system being able to automate some of those documentation objectives, not the policies and procedures that Mike was indicating, like a new user guide, for example, but the state of what those systems are and having that updated appropriately within the documentation. That can shortcut a lot of the discovery when you're going through a ticket triage, where you can start to see what has changed on this machine in the last 24 hours. It was working yesterday, it's not working today. And you can get a log of all the things that have changed. It's so important on being able to identify what the cause of perhaps the challenge was, because now the documentation is actually showing a log of those changes. Perhaps it was a patch last night, or maybe the third-party vendor came onto the machine the night before and installed something.
Mm.
But now you can see that, and now you can quickly identify and start to work on the remediation towards getting that system back up, for example.
And
Yeah, and
sorry, go ahead, Mike.
I think it leads into another point too. That's the advantage of relying on a partner's tools when they've already been vetted. Is they're all integrated, and that integration is already in place, and that can be a really complicated process of tying. So you're choosing your PS or your ticketing system, and you're choosing your RMM tool, and then now you have to figure out, okay, how do I get these all to talk to each other? When you're sort of using your partners for that, they've already done all that back end work. So that automated documentation is already set up and happening in a lot of cases.
So your documentation is fed by your RMM, which informs your ticketing system, and they're all accessed together. And then we'll go to the next thing, which is about measurement and visibility and satisfaction of where you're going. So they all need to feed into a way that you can get actual executive reporting. So at the end of the day,
Yeah.
what do you want to see? And this is where it gets really interesting, because once you've got the discipline of the systems, Calvin, what are you looking for? What
Well,
do you need in your dashboard?
clearly, my cousin was motivated by cupcakes coming into the IT team. So as long as we have a constant flow of cupcakes, that we know we're doing a
Cupcake
good
counter.
job. Yes. So in all seriousness, though, we need more cupcakes. But two, what we do need is an understanding of, again, meeting what the business needs are and circling that back to how IT is performing towards that. So that could be a measurement of the uptime. That could be a measurement of the productivity of the staff. And so typically what we're looking to achieve is a ticket volume of user. Best in class is 0.5 tickets per user per month. That's best in class. That's been a stat in the IT industry for over a decade. And so most organizations are above that, simply because there's perhaps not as much investments in things, but that is the golden state, is getting to that. So understanding, what is your ticket volume relative to your users, that might then indicate that you need to do more training, et cetera, and all those other things. The other component is around the effectiveness of the team. And so you can measure that through the time tracking, the types of tickets that they're working on, the capacity that is required within that team. So certainly then understanding that you want to get up into about 200 to 300 users supported by one IT individual. So that's typically what your kind of ratios are looking for. But IT is a broad term. So when you start thinking about, okay, is that help desk support? Is that cybersecurity support? Is that information systems around the business process and what needs to happen there? So, while you might have an umbrella term, which is IT, there's many different facets of that. And so ensuring that you have the measurement across each one of those teams so you can measure the effectiveness. The other component is when you start thinking about governance as it relates to maybe reporting that data up into a board. You want to be able to succinctly take that information and provide where the current state is. So you start to be able to see trends of how the IT operation is working, perhaps when additional investments need to be made, whether that's in people, in technology, capacity within the IT ecosystem. And so you can start to orient towards that, but data drives a conversation. And without the data, you're really, driving through more qualitative measurement, which I know boards don't reflect fondly on. So you want to have data that is quantifiable.
Not anecdote and not people's emotions, for sure. And one thing we've learned over time, I know, is you have to be careful about what you dashboard and how you do it, because averages can hide a lot of sins. So it tends to be thresholds. 100%. In other words, let's say your average response time is 25 minutes. Like your team's, you want to get it down to 15, but let's just say it's 25. And people are still unhappy because it turns out that Betty with the cupcakes gets a 2-second response time, and Bob down in the warehouse gets a 1-week response time, but it averages out to 25. So in managing your ITSM, making sure you're doing the thresholds to capture the outliers is actually a more important measurement than averages. Yeah. So beware of averages, one thing to learn. And that's probably a business truism that applies across the board.
Percentages are a very, they're good in some cases, but certainly when you're talking about velocity and volume, you want to be really, really clear on what that means and how that actually is reflective on the measurement. The one thing I wanted just to maybe touch on there is also the client experience. It's really understanding IT is to serve the organization, and so you want to have an understanding of what is the customer satisfaction of the IT team. So being able to survey the team after each ticket to understand, are they actually performing up? Did Susie actually meet Betty's response, and did they solve it in a timely fashion? Was it something that's not a repeat offender? Like if she's always calling, she's likely gonna reduce that. And so understanding the entire CSAT of the IT team is super important, so that you can understand whether the customer experience is improving or not, and the customers being the users within the business itself.
I'll just share a personal anecdote about how averages can be infuriating. Yesterday, I was on hold with the CRA for a simple question for 3 hours until 9 p.m. Mountain Time, when it said sorry and cut me off. Thank goodness Google was on hold for me. But angrily, I went to the Service Canada website, and they touted that 62% of the time they are meeting their service commitment of 15-minute response times. And I thought, so I'm obviously one of the 38%. And if if it goes from 15 minutes to 3 hours and then you get hung up on, I'm infuriated, right? And anyway, it's very funny, and I'll try again someday that I have more time, I suppose. But anyway, beware of the averages and those sorts of things. And I'm very passionate, as you two gentlemen know, about measuring the end user experience. A methodology we found has been really successful. People won't fill out surveys, but we found they'll do like a smiley face, upset face, medium face. So we just do a really simple survey, and we get a 24% response rate. So we have tens of thousands of data points feeding satisfaction. We get to know which techs receive the highest satisfaction or the lowest, which organizations are the happiest or the least. They can leave comments if they want. And more importantly is the discipline around responding to surveys that are not happy faces. So that is all kind of feeds into that. It doesn't solve everything, because not everyone, we're Canadian, so not everyone who's upset will actually, will be passive aggressive. I know it. Well, I just won't do a survey and nothing will get fixed, but then I don't have to deal with it. So all of that comes together to make the IT service management discipline. I wanted to share, though, for those who are thinking about, well, like how how can we tackle ITSM in our organization? Either if you're thinking about insourcing a component of your IT service management function that is currently outsourced, or if you've got an IT department and you think, what's the first step to help in bringing rationalization without having to rebuild it and gain years of experience? So what I'm going to do is share a little screen about a solution we have called IT Foundation. And the purpose of this is to demonstrate, how F12 can help with a turnkey solution in any of those scenarios to provide IT service management. So what we want to do here is make sure we're elevating the service experience, improving communication. So that's closed loop. And one of the things we didn't actually touch on is it's not just about logging a ticket, but making sure that all of the communication around that incident is all captured. And Calvin talked about it moving in a co-managed environment, that whole bucket of communication back and forth between the parties that are helping, having the visibility and enhancing IT operations. So that means an integrated RMM platform. Mike Gilbert gave us a lot of information about that. A service management platform. Sometimes the loose term is ticketing, but ticketing is just one thing it does. It should do triage and automation and notification and all sorts of other stuff in there as well. Service boards, tracking, dashboarding, the secure IT documentation, which plugs into those other elements, some training and guidance on how the system can be configured and monitored in order for it to be successful in your world, and then automating just patch management, which is almost a throwaway line there because you should be doing it, but a lot of organizations that don't have a grasp on their IT service management aren't effectively patching. So we'll just do it for you. We already do it for thousands of endpoints. It's not a big lift for us to just take on that responsibility to help you. So that's a little bit of a tease for those who are interested in exploring an IT service management stack in partnership with F12. Reach out to us. We're happy to help you start on the conversation and the journey about whether IT service management is your biggest need, and if it is, how we can help fill it in order to make your IT environment more effective and efficient, and how to inject the systems you need. So thank you, Calvin and Mike, as always, for joining us and having a conversation about a topic. IT service management may not strike everybody as the sexiest topic, but it is what we do at F12 all day, every day. So it's pretty near and dear to our hearts, the machinations that go on behind the scenes in order to make IT as seamless and as smooth as possible. Thank you very much. Have a great day.